Hi, so this is a discussion about high relief for your animal nature inspired tiles and for rule of thirds. All of the examples are from my Pinterest page, which you can get from my teacher website. So you'll see on this page they have this octopus, and he's both an animal and he's also in nature of being underneath the water. So this would be a great example of this project, but it could be pushed to be a little bit more interesting, and that's by using the rule of thirds. So if you divide a composition into equal thirds, and so it's into 9 different sections, where the sections cross, which are called power points, are one way of composition to make an interesting composition. So for the octopus in the previous example, while this is a pretty interesting composition, it could have been a little bit more dynamic if the octopus eye had been moved over maybe a little bit upward towards that intersection that's about here. This isn't a hard and fast rule, it's just a compositional tool to help people make interesting compositions. It's usually found in photography, like in this example. This is a typical picture of the Statue of Liberty, and it's pretty cool. It's pretty interesting. But if you shift the focal point over to one of the rule of thirds, it's a little bit more dynamic. It's a little bit more majestic. And the reasoning for this is that nature tends to be asymmetrical, or radial. Asymmetrical means that things aren't balanced perfectly. So in case of the Statue of Liberty, she's over here, which leaves us some open space for our mind to kind of wander. So this isn't very symmetrical, it's asymmetrical. Radial would be like many things in nature, like jellyfish, anemone, trees, things that come out from a center and then grow out. And then humans are usually bilaterally symmetrical. That means you could cut them in half one way and that left side would match that right side. So for this project, we're kind of trying to avoid bilateral symmetry because that's more of a human attribute, and we're leaning more towards asymmetry or radial symmetry. So if you lean more on the nature side, you could do this using where the sky meets the earth, and that's usually called a horizon line. So with this composition right here, it's right in the middle, so kind of like bilateral symmetry we were talking about before, and it's an okay composition, but this one on the right feels much more dynamic having the little house and lighthouse on one of those power points. So for this project, we're going to aim for a composition more like this. And again, when the sky meets the earth, you can draw the line on one of the intersections, and that makes a much more natural composition than if you put it straight in the middle. Right, how is the cat tile using the rule of thirds? Is there anything interesting on one of the crosshairs? I would say that the fish is almost just on a crosshair right about here, as well as the little cat head.
It's 10:45.
It brings your attention to both the fish and the cat head and how intently the cat is staring at the fish. For the bee, it's the little bee eye that's on one of those crosshairs. This is a clay tile example. They added layers, and you can see the seaweed to the left and the starfish kind of pop out because they were raised. If you were to make a tile with only one layer, like this background layer, that would be called low relief because there's only a little bit of distance in the piece. But because we'll be adding and building up on our tiles, it's more of a high relief. These are just more examples to give you some ideas. You could make a design that's subtle but very convincing. This bird blends into the background in this, so you'd want to add more depth to either the bird or the branches. If you added more depth, if you added more clay to this bird, it would make him a little chubbier, which would make him feel like he was closer to you. But if you did the opposite and added more clay to the branches instead, it would make the branches feel like they were closer to you. Usually anything that has more clay added will feel like it's closer to you. You can also play around with shape and contrast. This is much flatter, more of a low relief. And not everything that's animal or nature is always apparent at first look. A lot of barnacles, anemones can be interesting subjects. And so for this project, if the person had made the wings, added a bit more clay to the wings, that could be an interesting change to this to make it feel a little bit more interesting, a little bit more alive. And for your composition, it must be 5 inches, but you could put it on its axis so it's a diamond like this. And when we get to making your tiles, we'll have to be careful that the quills and small balls of clay will have to be secured on there by using slip. But we'll get to that later. Do you think this elephant follows the rule of thirds? Usually my students say yes. They think the elephant right here on his little ear is on one of the crosshairs, and the patterns change at a little horizon line going on here. It's not perfectly on a third, but it is enough to make it an interesting composition. Diagonals, as in going up and down while side to side, like this salamander, can also be an interesting composition choice. And if you choose to do a flower as your design, please try to think of an interesting, fresh way to design flowers and not the elementary school daisies or roses you usually draw. You can make something a lot more intricate and more fun to look at. And when we do get to the clay project, you can push the boundaries of high relief, but we won't want our clay to go thicker than 1/2 inch. So for a project like this person would have to carve out the clay in the back to make sure that it isn't thicker than 1/2 inch. Alright, I hope you enjoyed these examples, and if you have any questions, please let me know.